You're listening to ChooseFI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. ChooseFI, your home for financial independence online.
All right, today on the show, we are going to be speaking with a favorite in the FI community. Now, no less than 3 guests over the last 6 months have asked us to reach out to her. And at the end of today's episode, I think it'll be very clear why. Today, we're speaking with Jillian, a mama FI from Montana who has designed a life around intentional living, financial independence, and flexible income. Her and her husband started with $55,000 in debt, earned less than $50,000 a year, and within a decade and a half, they paid off all their debt, traveled to 27 countries, lived abroad for 4 years, adopted 4 kids, and had 2 biological kids, paid cash for their first home, and bought 2 rental properties that they fixed up themselves. Her and her husband have dedicated themselves to a life of giving, served on the boards of nonprofits, mentored kids from tough situations, and volunteered in all sorts of roles. I'm incredibly excited about this episode, and to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing quite well, Jonathan. Yeah, I'm really excited to have Jillian from Montana Money Adventures here on the podcast for sure. And I mean, you just went through like her background and bio and story. And I mean, that's really just the half of it. And that was something we could probably spend 10 hours talking to her about. I mean, there was that much here. I truthfully wasn't all that familiar with her blog until, like you said, multiple of our guests said, hey, she's our favorite blogger and you need to get her on the show. And yeah, I mean, we dove deep into her content and it's just really, truly remarkable. I know you're the one who's always saying like, I got chills down my spine, but in taking notes for this podcast, I basically just wrote down page 10 of notes, chills down spine. Like that's the kind of level that we're talking here. So yeah, anyway, long story short, with that, Jillian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're both very excited about this. You know, I want to say that I think my first introduction to your content was Tanya from Our Next Life, but I don't think it was until we interviewed Missed Adventure Rich and Fritz, like these additional touch points got me to go through your content. And then I just couldn't stop. I mean, it's truly, I think Brad's heard me say this maybe one or two other times where I start at the beginning and I just read literally everything, Brad, and I just can't put it down.
Well, thank you guys so much.
One of the articles that you wrote that really appealed to me, and I think it basically sets up a framework or an idea for kind of where you're coming from and what your approach to this journey is this article you wrote talking about big family minimalism. And I love that you framed it as this idea of not something that you were out seeking, but rather a tool of survival. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about your thought process as you were writing that.
Yeah, at the time, we had 1 kiddo at home. And then we adopted 3 and had a baby in less than 2 years. So minimalism kind of met us as a survival tool. It's it's a lot crazy to go from 1 to 5 kids in 2 years. And we didn't have an enormous house. Our house is about 1,650 square feet. And it just felt full and overwhelming. And anyone who's ever adopted kids, especially kiddos from foster care, knows they don't just come as kids. They come with a dozen appointments and all of these therapists and professionals. And I was overwhelmed.
So Jillian, this wasn't just minimalism in the sense that, oh, I'm going to tidy up my house. This was minimalism, right? Like I'm going to tidy up my life, or, I say that tongue in cheek, but this was across your entire life.
Yes. Yeah. We had to find a way to thrive and to be happy when there was such a large percentage of our life that for that season, we really didn't have a lot to say about. They don't say, well, which appointments would you like to go to? Which of these things would you enjoy doing? They just say, here's your new life. Good luck. So there was such a big percentage we couldn't control that we had to be really, really intentional about the things that were actually choices.
One of the things that struck me as I was reading this article, which we're going to link to in the show notes, was just the raw honesty of it. I mean, you're referencing, obviously the joy that these adoptees, these kids that you're bringing into your life bring you, but also just the pure exhaustion that comes along with it. I mean, you actually mentioned on here that there were many nights where you are just lying on the floor after you tuck them in and just crying silent tears. And like that ripped it in me. Just kind of living that out with you through your writing. But truly, this is what, this phrase that I've kind of has captivated my attention over the last year or so. There is no they, there's just you. And this is practically what it looks like. I mean, what is the reality of bringing 3 kids into your home?
It's impossibly difficult. It's unreasonably difficult. You go through things that you think, well, no reasonable person can do this. No unreasonable person can do this. And so you go to your caseworker and you're like, I'm at the end of my rope. And they're like, yeah, it's hard. Sorry about that. There's no tools. There's no resources. And so it's something that I had always felt called to do. I had always just had this heart for adopting kids that I felt like probably wouldn't get adopted otherwise. So our first son we adopted was a teenager from foster care. And then we adopted this sibling group of 3 kids that they had just gone through placement after placement after placement. And the state had tried to keep them together, but no family could meet the needs of all 3 kids. So they had been separated a lot. And I thought, somewhat foolishly, oh, we can do this. We can make this happen. But it stretches you to your very limit. And there's so many times that you think, well, this is unfair. This is unfair to the kids. This is unfair to me. Like, nobody should have to go through this.
Jillian, how did you get, just on like a personal level, like how did you get the nerve or the audacity to say, okay, this hasn't worked in these other places, but we can do this, truly?
I think that resilience and grit are something that I've learned to practice my entire life. I grew up, our family lived way below the poverty line, but I grew up in an amazing community. And the community, they're hard working. It's farmers and it's ranchers. And looking at those people's lives makes me feel like I've never worked a hard day in my life. There's so much in that culture that teaches resilience, that teaches grit. And I took those lessons and I just kept practicing it. And honestly, I would attribute most of our success from being $50,000 in debt to hitting financial independence at 32 as just part resilience, part grit, part really knowing what mattered to us, really knowing what was important, and good planning skills.
Jillian, what were those lessons? We're always looking for actionable takeaways for the audience. And it sounds great in theory, grit and resilience. What can you pass along to the audience that maybe 1 or 2 things that really stuck out to you in your life? Okay, grit and resilience sound good as a practical purpose, but this is what I did.
There's this idea I have that we have to cross-train our life. And it's essentially learning to do extremely difficult things in areas that are low risk. Learning to become deeply uncomfortable with things, because we all experience fear and we all have these things that hold us back. But if we can learn to be extremely uncomfortable and full of fear, but not let that override our system, not let that determine our choices, we have a lot more power. So in high school, we had a high school basketball team with Mr. Lackner. Mr. Lackner had a grueling physical conditioning program to where you're going to cry and you're going to throw up. Like, this is just the reality at the end of every day. You're going to work really hard for 3 to 4 hours, and by the end you will cry or throw up. But there's something about that when you get to that point and you realize, yeah, I'm crying and I'm throwing up and I'm doing exactly the thing I need to do to get where I want to go. Often I think that we look at those things that are so difficult that we're crying and throwing up and think, I must be doing something wrong. Obviously, this isn't working. When no, that might be the exact thing you need to get where you're trying to go. And just learning to be comfortable in that kind of space and in that kind of uncomfortableness and pain, and not let it derail your plans.
Jillian, I'm imagining like what this looks like. Brad and I both talk about over and over again how we've done, so many things to try to simplify our life. And in my mind, what you've done up to this point, describing bringing these kids into your world, you've almost invited chaos. There's a reality of what that actually looks like. And we talked about how minimalism for you was a tool to reclaim that. And I'm curious, like practically, what did that actually look like for you and your obviously growing very quickly family?
Yes, I've always been a big believer of quitting things. Every December, we do a quit list before we plan out our new year. And it's part of just kind of our intentional living before we add a bunch of stuff. What are we going to quit? And this just took that kind of process to like level ninja, because we had to quit everything that wasn't essential. And it's down to crazy things. Like, I don't wash my hair every day. We had to get rid of most of the kids' toys because I couldn't pick up toys. I don't vacuum every day now. Like, we quit sports, we quit activities. We only kept the things that truly were so high value that we didn't feel like we could survive without them. And I think there's this tendency to just not really want to give stuff up if it's good enough. If it's good enough, there's an uncomfortableness of ending friendships, of ending volunteer commitments, of ending meetings, of getting rid of items that we like, but maybe aren't the most high value. So that having our family grow so rapidly gave us the motivation to make those more essential cuts.
Jillian, what's the process on a real granular level of how you think through like, okay, this is something that stays or something that goes? Do you have like multiple points that you go through, or is it just like hey, this is almost like a hell yes or no type deal?
I don't know. At the end of the year, we start from really Thanksgiving to New Year, we start thinking about what we really want to see happen in the coming year, what things are really important to us. And then we weigh that against the amount we're willing to sacrifice. Because if something is really important to us, it's almost like creating kind of an offering. Like, we're going to offer up the time and energy and the money from these other things to make that happen. So like, I had a hot tub for years and I loved my hot tub, but it took a little bit of time, energy, and money. And it said, well, I can either have this or that other thing that I really want to see happen. So my husband quit hunting for a whole year. We had ducks, but we really wanted to travel with our kids. Ducks don't travel really well. So it's kind of the process of weighing the things we really do want to see happen that are so core to kind of our passion, our values, against the good stuff. Because it's easy to cut the unnecessary stuff. It's easy to cut the mediocre stuff, but the rubber really hits the road when you start to cut stuff that is actually pretty good, but not the best.
One of the things that comes to mind is I'm imagining you do this, attempting to reclaim control of your life and get some sort of consistency from one day to the next, is the practicalities of trying to take a toy from a child. You have all these Happy Meals toys. You have all these little things that you've collected from 1,000 different places. And I think maybe to some varying degree, there is a criticism that a lot of the loudest voices in the blogger space often are doing this without kids and don't recognize the struggles that are involved with trying to make these changes with 1, 2, or in your case, 5 or 6 kids. And I'm just curious, can you comment on this? Like, practically, what was it like to pursue minimalism from your perspective with them, but also from their perspective? How did this go?
So here's the process that we used, and it worked really well. And anyone who, if you have a lot of kids, I know that fear of parents of this is going to be an enormous battle and there will be tears and it will be torture for everyone involved. So what we did is we let the kids kind of just go amok for a week or two. No cleaning, no tidying, no organizing. And then I came to them and I apologized. And I said, I'm really sorry because I feel like I haven't done a great job. It's too hard for you to clean your room. And honestly, I think that that's my fault. I've let things go and I've made this job that should be yours impossible. So here's what we're going to do. I want you to clean it the best you can. And anything that you can't clean up, anything that you can't handle, I'm going to take care of and I'm going to put it away on a different shelf. So you only have enough toys in your room that you can actually take care of. We explained to all of our kids, and there still was a little bit of tears because they were struggling to clean up their room. But really, that was on me. I'm the adult. I'm the one who let them have 400 toys in their room that a 3-year-old is never going to be able to organize or pick up. In the end, we kind of settled on they could handle about 2 to 3 toys in their room and keep clean. And we've been doing this now for a couple of years, and it's just brilliant. They can very easily pick everything up. They can keep it tidy. And if at any point it gets to the point where they are crying or frustrated because they can't clean up their rooms themselves, I say, don't worry about that. We'll take these things and we'll put them away.
Jillian, when someone walks in your home, 1,650 square feet, 5 kids, does someone think minimalism?
It does not look very minimalist. As far as there are no magazines calling to photograph my home, but it looks calm. And it doesn't look like a tornado went through a daycare, which probably would have been the default if we hadn't gone through this. It looks comfortable, like people live here and there's enough space for the people, but nothing is white. Even things that were white when I originally bought them are no longer white. Like nothing is just super sleek or stainless steel everything. It looks probably normal, I would say.
Jillian, I'm most curious about like the life minimalism. So as you described it, you have, I guess, like 12 weekly appointments that you had to take the kids to, especially in those early years. And you basically said it that, hey, we can't have these times moving around. Like you were adamant about that. And presumably like you took kids out of sports and you only did the stuff that was absolutely essential. And I think, again, I'm always looking to like bring this back to the audience and what they can take away. So many people are, quote, busy all the time, right? Because they're shuttling their kids to 7 different sports on the weekends and they feel like they're depriving them if they don't. And I'd love to hear your thoughts since you've actually lived this.
An exercise I encourage people to go through. There's a post on my site about creating your ideal day and week and year. And I have them write that out. Like, what would be your ideal? If you could just tomorrow, next week, pick anything. Like, what does that schedule actually look like? And line that up with their current spending, with the spending they've been tracking, and their current schedule. And say, how do we synthesize these 3 things? Because sometimes what people say, here's the things I value the most, here's what's most important to me. And then I look at how they're actually spending money and how they're spending their time. And there's a huge disconnect. So I think you have to start by really understanding what is important to us as a family, what is important to us that would actually increase our happiness. And then are these things that we're doing, yeah, they're good things. You know, your kids being in soccer and basketball and art and ballet, like those are all good things. But are they helping you create this life? Or is it chaos getting out the door? Is it stressful? Are dinners getting pushed really late? Is this actually the picture of life that you wanted to have? And for us, it wasn't. I wanted us to be able to have dinner as a family. I wanted us to be able to read books together and to have quiet time and to do art projects and to do science projects. But all of these other things we were doing were kind of making that impossible, or if we tried to squeeze that in too, making it really stressful and not fun.
Jillian, I'm curious, how much did you involve your children in this decision making? I guess just this whole systemic, what do we want out of life? I guess when you started this and maybe now as they're growing up more?
For us, it's a lot about keeping the conversation open. And we do that in everything, whether it's our schedule or our values or money, just finding opportunities to engage. You know, when it was really stressful, we had the boys in Taekwondo at first. And it was stressful getting out the door. It was stressful finding parking. It was stressful getting there. And so for a number of times I said, like, are we having fun right now? Are you guys enjoying this? It seems like we're a little stressed. I know it used to be fun, but it's kind of not feeling that way. So that if we've had that conversation 5 or 10 times, when I finally come back and I say, maybe we could do something different. What if we did these other things? Does that sound good? My boys, they love science experiments. So every time they would ask to do science experiments, I would just say, well, we could do that. But right now we've given a lot of our time to these other activities. Which one seems more enjoyable and more important to you guys?
I loved how you talked about this idea of building your ideal day. And I'm sure it's something that we'll continue to come back to throughout this podcast. But I'm curious, for your family specifically, what does that ideal day, that ideal week actually look like? And then for a family that identifies as flourishing with less, what does that mean?
So it's been kind of a fun experiment in the last 2 years. We hit financial independence and we decided to take a mini retirement. And a big focus in this last 2 years is figuring out and testing our ideal day. It's something that I had done before to kind of get the ball rolling to see where we wanted to go. But this year has been really, the rubber's met the road and we've really been testing this out. So for us currently, my husband gets up with the kids a little bit earlier than me because they wake up at like 4 or 5 in the morning. These kids are insane. So I usually get up about 6. Sometimes I might do a little bit of writing in the morning. I have a morning routine. We get the kids out the door. Him and I go to the gym for an hour and a half. We usually go out to coffee afterwards and we talk for about an hour. We come home, we eat lunch. We put the baby down for a nap. We either work together on a project for an hour or two, or he might take care of some laundry or run an errand. I might do a call with someone for an hour in the afternoon. The kids come home. We usually go outside and we play in the backyard and they jump on the trampoline and we do the swings. Me and my husband sit in chairs under our apple tree. We drink some coffee. We have raspberry bushes and a garden. So we kind of tinker around in that. And then we come in and make dinner. The kids do some reading and some coloring and we get them in bed by 7. And then him and I have a little bit of quiet time before we either watch some TV or do some reading. And we're usually in bed by 9.
One of the things that stood out to me in particular was, and honestly, it comes through in all of your content, as you continue to read one article and the next, the thread that ties all these together is this art of conversation. And it's almost like you've identified this as a lost skill set that people have traded in for more time with Netflix. And I'd be curious to hear you just talk about that for a little bit. How does good conversation become part of your daily life?
Conversation and planning is something I really attribute to kind of the unexpected success we've had. Is that we've been married almost 16 years now, but we always carved out a lot of time just to talk about our life, like what we wanted it to look like, where we wanted to go, what are those big things that we really wanted to see happen. I mean, it's how we enjoy spending time together, is dreaming and planning and thinking about it and really practicing gratitude for where we are right now and where we've come from, but looking forward. You combine some spreadsheet geekiness in there, and that's really that's how we've always connected. And it's a great way for us. We've just transitioned that to connecting with our kids that way. What do you want to do and what's important and what do you enjoy, and practicing that gratitude and I guess the looking forward part as well.
Jillian, what does that actually look like when you involve your kids in this? I think so many of us, especially like my kids get home from school, I ask them how their day was and I get like a non-committal grunt and, that's kind of that. And I mean, they're wonderful kids. I mean, truly wonderful kids, but it's my own fault. I'm not asking the right questions. I'm not overtly doing this with a plan, which it sounds like you are. So I'd love to hear your advice to me and the millions of me's out there who probably aren't connecting with their kids on the level that you are.
Well, first, it's difficult. I mean, it's difficult if we're working full-time jobs. It's difficult if we have all these other commitments. Honestly, our bandwidth and our attention and our emotional energy just gets drained by the end of the day. And we definitely have had seasons in our life where I just didn't feel like I had much to give to anybody by the end of the day, either because it was a hard day at work or life just felt kind of hard. One of the reasons that minimalism comes in is we're taking good things out to make space for better things. And one of those better things is just being able to have engaging, relaxed conversations. Very practically, like I don't use a cell phone. We don't really engage that much online. With whoever I'm with, I try to be present and I try to be engaged. And with my kids, it gets easier. My 10-year-old last night, it was kind of busy when we were getting the kids in bed. And he was like, Mom, I think I want to make videos. I think I want to do something on YouTube. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a long conversation. So I said, okay, that's an awesome idea. How about this? I'm going to take care of this thing. You go and you write me a proposal. Write down all of the topics that you want to cover, what your channel would be about. Write down, a few ideas of videos you would do for each one. And then put together a little statement of why you think you should be able to do this. And as soon as I get the kids in bed, we're going to go over all that.
It's that agency. I think that's something, Brad, that you've talked about with your kids in the past, but you're engaging them where they're at. That's incredibly powerful. And I'd love to almost go back just for a little bit and talk about financial independence. And, we kind of talked about minimalism for a little bit, but I think what was so fascinating is you have reached financial independence. And from my understanding, reading your blog, at no point in time did you make a six-figure income on this 10, 15-year path to FI.
No.
I think it's just, all right. Can we talk a little bit about what your income level was as you pursued financial independence, and then go back and talk about this idea of the flashpoint?
Our income level was not a lot. It was not a lot. So that first year that we were married, we were still in college. I think we brought in about $12,000. We had $50,000 in debt too. So it wasn't like an awesome start to this. My husband joined the Army in part to help pay that off. And he joined as, enlisted, like E2, which I think brings home like $1,000 a month plus housing. And I worked at a coffee shop, and eventually, we kind of got promoted a little bit to where we were both at that maybe $30,000 a year mark, which just felt crazy. It felt extravagant. I had never even thought that we would make that much money. But probably our peak combined income was right around that $50,000, $60,000 a year along this process. There were some years that he made a little bit more, but I stayed home. It wasn't impressive, but like everything in life, there's pros and cons to both sides of the equation. And you just kind of do the best you can with whatever you have.
You used a term called flashpoint. I think that that's something that Brad and I have talked to about as an awakening or a light bulb moment, or, whatever that moment was. You said, I'm going to make an unorthodox choice to get an unorthodox result. Like, what was your flashpoint? Can you break that down for the listeners?
Yeah, I had always, some kids are just natural savers and some are spenders. I was always a little bit of a natural saver. It was just a very comfortable thing for me to save money. But then when I was probably about 12, my mom had remarried, and she'd been married for a few years, and it had just become an unfortunate situation. The guy she had married was, I'm sure, a nice enough guy at first, but had just started drinking a lot and had become really verbally abusive and just emotionally abusive. And it was like there was a rain cloud over our house. Our house was very hostile all of the time. And I was probably in about the 6th grade, and I said, we can't do this. We can't live this way. We can't stay here. We need to get out. I made a very impassioned plea for this, and my mother, being very realistic and a very pragmatic woman, said, Jillian, we can't. We just can't. There's no way that I can afford to take care of 3 kids on my own. So, sorry, it's not an option. And that was, I went upstairs and I just cried like hot tears into my bed. But that was the point that I realized money gives you options. The more money that you have, that you've saved, the more options you have. And I desperately wanted more options. And I wanted my life to look different. I didn't ever want to be in that position where I felt like I had to stay someplace I really didn't want to stay just because I didn't have any other option.
Yeah, one quote I picked out from your article was, quote, "Living in poverty feels like all your choices are made for you." And that just really was so powerful and spoke to me. And I'm curious, so from that point, that flashpoint, I guess, at 12 or thereabouts, how do you personally go about making changes that can help you? Obviously, at that point, your mom couldn't extricate herself from this situation, but you realized, okay, I need to get myself in a position where this doesn't happen to me.
Yeah. It created that internal motivation to just run fast and to run hard. And like, I knew I had to stay in this spot right now. But boy, I was making plans. I was making plans for things to be different. So I tried to do really great in school. I tried to excel in every sport and after school activity. And I worked all through high school. And I just saved that money. And I ended up moving out of the house just before, actually during my junior summer. I had saved up enough and I moved out and I lived on my own. And by the time I graduated high school, I had saved $8,000, which to me was just an insane amount of money. Our family at the time was making about $12,000 to $15,000. And it just felt like I had a fortune. I had a fortune that was just going to fuel more opportunities and more choices going forward.
You had a line that stood out. There were so many lines that stood out to me as I was reading your blog. One was this idea of hatching your escape plan. I'm here. I have no agency. I have no control. I don't have options, but I'm going to escape this. And the other that stood out to me was this realization, and it's almost a reflection looking back, that it took you decades to learn to be okay with looking poor in order to build wealth. And I'm curious, what does that mean for you on this 15-year path to financial independence? What levers did you pull to reach financial independence? If someone was going to get your highlight reel, like what was your game plan that you implemented to do this on a below the median income level in the United States anyways, to reach financial independence?
Well, financial independence honestly was never my plan because it didn't seem possible. It didn't seem very realistic. I just was trying to make things better. I think if I would have said, I want to try, I take that back. I would have never, ever said, I'm going to be financially independent by 32. Like, it was such a ridiculous idea. But I knew what the next right step was. And I knew what the step after that was. And I knew the direction I wanted to go of just having more financial freedom, having more choices, having more options, and really being able to get the things in my life just seemed the most important. I really wanted to travel. I really wanted to own my own home. I really wanted to be able to adopt. And even just those things when we got married seemed kind of ludicrous, like just a little bit of a pipe dream from where we were coming from. It took a long time, and I still kind of struggle with the idea of looking poor. Having a very large net worth helps a little bit, to be honest. Like, that has my back, where when I was 22 and 23 and we didn't have that, it was much harder to feel good about the criticism and just the stuff that we take from the critics. The more progress you make, the easier it gets. And that's always what I try to encourage people on my site is it gets easier. It starts so difficult. It's so hard at the beginning for not really the math and not really even the practical steps. I think a lot of it for us is the internal stuff, not really knowing where we want to go, not having the courage to chase those things down, being really concerned about not fitting in and being different is so hard at the beginning. 15, 16 years in, I've gotten pretty comfortable with that stuff.
So Jillian, I love this story, and I love how you've taken this power back in your life, and it's made you just so much stronger in every level. But it wasn't just this upward trajectory from 12 to now. As I understand it, there was a point where you and your husband were $50,000+ in debt. And I'm curious, how that happened, especially like when you had that flashpoint at 12 and said, okay, I'm going to do everything quote unquote right. How did you get into that debt? And then how did you decide, okay, we need to really get ourselves out of this as quickly as possible?
So my husband, my lovely, darling husband, helped out with bringing some of that debt into our marriage. He had about $35,000 in student loans when we got married and about $10,000 in credit card, maybe $12,000 in credit card debt. You know, I talked about pros and cons of each situation. He had grown up in a really comfortable middle-class lifestyle. There's a lot of pros to that. One of the cons is that when he went to college, he really tried to continue that comfortable middle-class lifestyle as a broke college student and had just come into all this debt. So we got married and we knew, okay, I just hated debt. I just hated it so much. So we set up a plan to attack that as quick as possible. We actually moved into a camper, a really ugly, unfortunate camper, but we moved in there because it was going to save us like $150 a month. And I always like to encourage people because sometimes we can see the downside of something, but we rarely are able to see the potential upside. And while that sounds like a hard decision to make to move into a camper, it was actually amazing. Like, it was hard to look so poor. It was hard because it was a little bit embarrassing, but it was amazing as a young married couple. We had just enough space for what we needed and no space for anything we didn't. We didn't have yard work. We didn't spend weekends fixing things. It made that first year of marriage really awesome. So we kind of hatched a plan to take care of his debt. And I actually didn't know about my debt. In high school, I had ended up in the hospital for a while. And I had thought, I was under the impression that insurance or the hospital had taken care of the bill. I didn't actually find out until we had been married maybe 2 years. And we had just finished paying off all that debt. And of course, we're like, oh my gosh, we're debt free. Let's look at buying a house. So we went to this little expo thing and they ran our credit scores. I had never had my credit score run. And 3 weeks later in the mail, I got a notice from a collection agency that said, I think it was like $11,000 of debt. And it was a horrible, devastating blow. I felt like we had made so much progress to just be blindsided by this thing that was so unexpected.
So you had all this momentum, and I'm assuming at this point, if you were able to pay off close to $30,000 in debt to get to this point, then this next step, while it is a psychological setback, it's clearly something that you guys have the ability or the desire to do. So I can easily see this next step. But it struck me that I know that you ended up paying for a house cash. And that is a very remarkable achievement to do in your, I guess, at the age of 30. And I would love to hear, like, what is the reality for you as someone that is a frugal person, of someone that believes in not having debt? Like, what was the reality of paying for a house cash?
There again, it was one of those things that I never expected or planned for at the very beginning. But we had finished paying off his debt. We tackled my debt. We saved up our first $10,000. And then I was like, we just need to keep going. We just need to keep saving. So by the time I was 24, we had saved up our first $100,000. And that was just, felt like, man, it was such a huge accomplishment. It felt like such an enormous amount of financial freedom. I mean, I had never imagined, like, just that amount of money felt incredible. And we kind of went all in on the stock market. And one of the points in our story is I never postponed life. I never said, because there again, I didn't really think we would hit financial independence. So it wasn't like I was like, well, let's just keep our head down and do this thing for 10 years and knock it out and we'll get there. Because I didn't actually think that that was possible. So along the way, it helped us be really intentional of, let's do the things that matter to us right now. So we moved overseas. We ended up traveling almost constantly for 4 years. We got to see so much of Europe and beyond. And then that money grew. Saving that first $100,000, man, I have a post on my site of like why that was so difficult, how we did it, but why it was so difficult. The math makes it look easy. The math makes it seem, well, that's not hard at all. But we made a lot of choices that other people simply didn't want to make. And I think most times the path to success is filled with choices that other people said, nah, I'm okay. Nah, I don't really care. Cool for you. I'll pass. So it was a married couple. We lived in DC, high cost of living. We had one kid, and then we had a roommate for 3 years. That choice alone gave us $25,000 of those dollars. We lived on one income. Like I said, we both made about 30. So we lived on Adam's salary, and we saved all of mine, which was about 25, 30 over 4 years. So that kind of helped us get to that first 100,000. Just those two choices. But when we came back, here again, choices that other people probably wouldn't want to make. We had about $250,000 between index funds and our Roth IRA. And we started looking at houses. Like at some point in Europe, I said, I really want to pay cash for a house. Like we had grown our net worth to like 150, 200 at that point. And it just started to click like, oh, this might be possible. So I knew that I wanted to do that. And we came back and we started looking at houses, and it was the perfect time in that the housing market was really low. And there, again, it's one of those things that luck often comes to those who were prepared. A lot of people, if they had been prepared, maybe could have taken advantage of this. But for most people, it was a really unfortunate circumstance. And we could have bought, it would have been super reasonable to buy a $100,000 house, $150,000 house. I think anyone would have said, well, that's a great life choice there. You've saved $150,000, or you've saved $250,000 and you spend $150,000. That's obviously a good life choice. And it would have been a good choice, but it wouldn't have been the best choice for us, knowing all of the other big things that we wanted to do. So we bought a really, really ugly, a really sad $50,000 house. And we had never owned before we bought this house. We had always rented. So we didn't have any maintenance skills. We had no repair skills. And I just held my husband's hand and I was like, we'll watch YouTube videos. We'll figure it out somehow. There was no like Chip and Joanna Gaines standing there saying, yes, we'll make this beautiful. It was just us who had no tools and knew exactly nothing about construction.
I mean, that's, again, another one of these situations where you just have this audacity about life. And I mean that in the most positive way possible, Jillian. I mean, literally the most positive way I could possibly express. How do you get the nerve? I guess maybe I'm just too scared in life. I think I'm realizing that in this hour conversation that I don't make those leaps. That would scare the heck out of me. I know reading your article about this, there was black mold all across this house. Like your family and friends must have thought you were crazy. Yeah. How do you get the nerve? And what do your family and friends think? I guess as a total separate side question, what do they think about this house and your lifestyle, I guess?
Nobody was excited about the house. And not that I blame them. It looked like a disaster. I saw the potential, but they did not. And I was even Skyping with my mom, and I heard my stepdad in the background go, does she try to find the ugliest houses? Like, is this... what is going on? No, they didn't really see it. But there again, that's one of the things I've had to learn over the years to be really comfortable with, is that not everybody is going to understand every decision, and not everybody's going to support every decision. Even with adopting, there were a number of people who said, why are you doing this? Why are you putting yourself through this? Why don't you just have biological kids? Like, that's the dream. That would be easier. And they're absolutely right. It would have been easier, but that just wasn't what was really true to us. That wasn't what we wanted at the end of our life, to look back and be like, well, we did the easy thing. We took the super comfortable path. But to you, Brad, I think there are a lot of ways that we can test this and push this and just learn to be super uncomfortable and learn to be scared and just do things anyway. I was talking with one of the guys I mentor the other day, and we were sitting at Starbucks. And we were talking about this idea, and I said, if you walked into the bathroom right now and you came out and you said, ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention for a minute? I was just in the bathroom and it looked so beautifully clean. Can we all just give a round of applause for the amazing staff here and start clapping? Like, that is a deeply uncomfortable thing for most people to do. Just the thought of it kind of makes people sick to their stomach actually doing that. But there's no risk. There's no downside. People might be like, oh, that's weird, and go on with their life. But there's not actually risk. And we can learn to be that deeply uncomfortable and still take action.
Jillian, do you have other instances that you advise your mentees how to lean into discomfort and little ways like that? Like, I don't know if anybody's actually taken you up on that, like that go into the bathroom and come out type thing, but like, are there other things that you could pass along to the audience that, hey, maybe step outside your comfort zone this week, do one thing that'll really make a difference?
There's so many ways that we can do this, from one, being scared, and two, feeling pain, but still moving forward. Even things as simple as, and I generally only do this on vacation because it makes it a little bit more comfortable, but wearing an outfit that doesn't match at all, that's just straight up weird, and just going out into the world in that and dealing with that uncomfortableness, because people will look at you odd. But that's a key life skill to learn to acknowledge. I realize that you disapprove of what I'm doing right now by wearing this super strange outfit, and I'm going to be okay with my choice anyways. Those are just tiny ways that we can practice. I think that exercise, I hired a personal trainer, Nate. He kills me in the gym, but there's something about learning to be in so much pain and so uncomfortable, and then dig a little bit deeper and realize that that doesn't have to determine how I choose to respond in that moment. Like, I can keep going a little bit farther. There's a lot of ways that we can just learn both of those skill sets.
There was a quote that stood out to me that you had mentioned as well from George Bernard Shaw, and it was, "The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man." And I think that that is the perfect analogy for what we're talking about, this idea of anchoring yourself just a little bit outside of your comfort zone, because anything then becomes possible. I go back to this early example you had of living a year in a camper. If you can do that as a newlywed couple, where everybody says that's the most difficult years of marriage, then you can do anything. You can tackle this $50,000 house that nobody else would look at. But these decisions, these hard decisions, like packing your lunch, living in a camper, driving a beater car, pulling out moldy sheetrock, these things, these hard decisions have set you up for a much easier life in your 30s, 40s, and 50s, in the best years of your life. It's being uncomfortable in these situations that gives you the opportunity now to focus on the most precious parts of your life, your kids, putting, everything that we started this episode about, talking about how you really wanted to put your passion into these kids that had these broken homes, this broken background. It's a chance for you to give them your best because you are able to be slightly uncomfortable in these earlier years. It's very powerful.
Yeah, I think we live in a culture that values things to be easier, not harder, and tries to eliminate as much risk and discomfort. Like, no one ever buys a vacuum because they're like, this vacuum's 5 times harder to push than my old one was. That'll be perfect. No, like, we always try to sell and advertise, this will be easier, this will be simpler, this won't cost you as much. But everyone who's accomplished something great, everyone who's done something amazing with their lives, it did cost them something. And it was difficult. No one has a great achievement that was easy. I love this line by Brené Brown. She says, we can choose courage or comfort, but never both. And so she has this motto of courage over comfort. And that's kind of my personal motto. We have to be courageous in our life because we only get this one. Like, this is our one shot at doing it. And I just wasn't ever willing to waste it. I wasn't willing to say, I'll give up this thing I really want because there's a little bit of risk, or because it might not go well, or I might fail. I better fail. I better fail a lot, because then I know I'm really trying. And the best things that I come to in life will be just littered with failure all along the way there. Part of our story is I'd mentioned we adopted a teenager from foster care. And maybe this was grit and courage. It was probably stupidity, but he was 12. And when I made the decision, I had just turned 21. I remember we had gone away. The social worker had called us and said, listen, I've got this kid. I know you're not really ready. I know you're not thinking about it right now, but I can't find another home for him. So either you can adopt him or I'll just stick him in a group home and he'll age out of the system. And he was 11. And I just thought, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if this is going to go well, but that can't be the only option. And it was hard. It was ridiculously hard. He was diabetic. He had so many emotional and behavioral problems. And that first year was very challenging. And it got better. Slowly, bit by bit, it got better. And he grew up and he graduated high school and he was getting ready to apply for college. And then one day my husband drove to my work and he said, you need to leave early. I looked at my boss and I was like, okay. And I went and checked out. And as soon as we got in the car, Adam let me know that Micah had been found dead in his apartment. And he was 20 years old and it just devastated me. But I really believe that we can't waste good. All of the good that we put into things. And this is whether you're trying to pay off debt, whether you're building a family, whether you're trying to build a business. Sometimes we can look at the failures and say, well, then all of that was wasted. I don't think any of the good things that we put in the world and build are wasted. We get to keep all of the good things, even if the ending isn't the one we had hoped for.
Wow, that's incredibly, incredibly powerful, and just such a powerful lesson for everyone out there that it's not always about the result. I just recently read a book by a poker player actually named Annie Duke called Thinking in Bets. And she calls that kind of logical fallacy in thinking resulting, which is just merely looking at the result and determining if it was a good or bad decision just based on the result. She says that's completely a false way to look at it. That, like you said, you don't have to waste good. You can, take away all the learning lessons. You can take away all the good years in your case. And even if there are failures in life, you're always going to take many, many good things and pick yourself back up and get stronger and go from there. So yeah, I mean, that to me, I don't really have a question here for you, Jillian, but that to me is just such a powerful concept. And I hope everyone in the audience really takes that to heart.
And I have a follow-up on that as well. And thank you for sharing that. I'm sure that even now, when you're separated by time, what a raw story that must be and how painful and fresh it will probably always feel. As you're reflecting on this and you're drawing from it and you're realizing that it's more than just the ending, it's the process. Like, what are the lessons that you took away, and like, how does that affect your daily life now?
I think to some degree, it gives us courage to know that, the ending doesn't have to be perfect to everything, to try something and to grow into something and to test something out. So many times I talk to people and they're like, well, I might want to do that, but it might not work out exactly as I hoped. They want to, even to be honest, even a lot of people, once they hit that FI number, they're scared. They're scared to leave. They're scared to transition. They're scared of what life might look like after that. And what if this happens? And what if that happens? And what if this other thing over here happens? There's risk there. And it's okay to walk forward, not having all of the answers, and there being risk. We have that confidence that even if things don't go well, we're going to be okay. We're going to keep moving forward. It's not going to devastate us or crush us to face rejection or to face failure. My husband worked at probation and parole for a while with people who were felons and trying to rehabilitate their lives. And they called it the F it factor. which I refer to as the forget it factor. And that is how many times and how many things can go wrong before someone says, forget it. Forget it. I'm not even going to do this. And that number is very different for each person. Sometimes it's just one thing. One thing goes wrong and they're like, forget it. Nope, not doing it, not going there. But other people, like we talked about resilience and grit, 10 things can go wrong. 20 things can go wrong. 50 things can go wrong in a process, and they'll keep moving forward. And those are the people who become really successful, whether they're former felons or whether they're entrepreneurs or whether they're pursuing, a custom-built life. How many things can go wrong before you say, just forget it?
One of the things you said that really spoke to me was this idea that the story is more than just the ending. And I think that one of the criticisms of FI historically, and it's probably still accurate now, is that we're always so focused on hitting that magical 25 times your annual expenses. And in light of that, we sometimes marginalize the power of the journey. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I guess because I didn't really have that, we're going to hit this number really soon. It took a long time before we really got there. I just always wanted to lean in to whatever season of life we were in. And that was really important. I mean, there's things you can do in your 20s you can't really do in your 30s or in your 40s or your 50s. Like, I always push back against this idea of push the best of our life to the end of our life. So I was always trying to find ways to fit in the things that mattered to us. And like I even mentioned with my son, I mean, nothing's promised, nothing's guaranteed. And all of the trips that we did with him and all of the things that were so important to us about that, if I would have waited until we hit FI, we would have had to miss it all. It wouldn't have been able to be replicated. So I think it's important to avoid this mentality of we're just going to put our heads down and we're going to push through and we're going to bide time until we hit this magic number, and then everything in our life will change. It'll be better and we'll figure it out when we get there. I almost never see that actually work out well in real life, because my husband was in the military. Almost all of our friends have retired in their 40s. Like, this is a very normal part of our social circle. And it's a hot mess. It's just kind of a disaster every single time. Now, especially if it was the man in the military, they would never say that. Partly because they've probably done 3 or 4 deployments in the Middle East, and they are not about to complain about having to figure out what to do around the house. But if you ask their wives, their wives will tell a very different story about how difficult this transition is. I think especially in the military, because you're so focused on the job at hand, you're so focused on just getting stuff done right now, that you don't take the time to look up and say, what do we really want to do with our lives? What really does matter? What kind of impact do we want to make? How do we enjoy spending our time? How do we structure our life so that it's meaningful and fulfilling and enjoyable and challenging? All of those things don't necessarily, I wouldn't even say necessarily, they don't magically happen when you hit this FI number. It's something you have to be growing and cultivating the entire time.
Jillian, you adopted a child at 21. You seemingly had these plans for your life at such an early age. And I'm curious, where did that come from? Like, did you yourself sit down and have this reflection on what I want my life to look like at 18, 19? Like, when did this happen?
I would say actually started much earlier. Like, a lot of my initial dreams, a lot of my initial goals started when I was 10, 11, 12. I bought my very first travel book. And for years, I read it. It was years outdated, but I read it and I highlighted it and I thought about what this would be. And didn't really know it at the time, but I think that intentional kind of casting a vision for your life was really important in getting, we ended up moving to Europe. We ended up so far exceeding that expectation. I had started when I was probably 8. I'm obsessed with residential architecture. Like, I'm so passionate about it. I've probably toured 100 different like historic homes. And I super geek out over this. But I started sketching design ideas and architecture ideas when I was like 8 or 9, because I just loved it so much. And I always knew like, if I could figure out a way to do this, I absolutely want that in my life. It didn't seem possible. I had no idea. And I think that's a struggle that so many of us have. There's things we want, but then we quickly dismiss it because we can't, at the very beginning, we cannot see a logical plan to get us there. And it was something I definitely struggled with. But instead, I just did the next right step. I just made the next right step, and keeping those long-term goals and dreams like hidden in my heart while I'm making progress.
The planning that you're talking about, this is an art form. This has to be very intentional. In fact, even doing this, like we talked about the power of having conversations. We talked about the power of really living life with intention. There's a reason that not everybody does this. It can be somewhat uncomfortable just to get out of the easy choice, which might be watching 5 hours of TV each night once you get home from work and you're just decompressing. I mean, it's something that will definitely make you happier without fail across the board. When you spend more time doing this, you're going to be a happier, more fulfilled person. But it's not an easy choice to do that. And what I love about this particular conversation is I know that it's not just all talk. You have also gone to great lengths to lower the barrier so that people can start to build this more intentional lifestyle by building different types of worksheets to start these conversations, to build different worksheets to create this idea flow of designing this future. And I know that it's something you actually give to people for free that are on your email list. If you go to montanamoneyadventures.com, you go to the homepage and you get on your list. I know for a fact that you get all of these worksheets at one time so that you can kind of riff through them. And I love it. I think if you're trying to find a way to talk to your spouse or your partner and have these more meaningful conversations, this is the perfect place to start. And for our audience, I encourage you to go do that. But some people are going to want to connect with you directly. What's the best way for someone to connect with you?
My email list is it's kind of my inner circle, and it's definitely the easiest way to keep in touch with me. Every week I send one email out and you can just hit reply and it shows up right in my inbox, and I have great conversations offline with readers and subscribers. If you don't like to comment, I get that. You can email me directly. It's montanamoneyadventures@gmail.com. If you really need to talk to me about something, shoot me an email and I'll give you my phone number. We can talk on the phone. I normally actually give out my phone number on podcast interviews, but I know I'll be traveling. So I'm going to be this year we're going through 11 national parks, and the cell phone service is horrible. And I would just hate for people to call and then me not be able to get back to them for like 6 days because we're hiking 12 hours a day in the middle of nowhere.
That's perfect. Well, I hope that everybody takes you up on that. I promise you these worksheets are worth your time. Jillian, normally that would be the end of the episode, but on this show, we would love to give you the chance to tackle the hot seat. Are you ready for this?
Absolutely.
In a world drowning in debt and rampant consumption, trapped by the chains of lifestyle inflation, these questions highlight the secrets of those who have broken free. Welcome to the ChooseFI hot seat.
All right, Jillian, question number 1, your favorite blog that's not your own.
The one I'm really loving right now, like I said, I hired a personal trainer, Nate, who kills me. And one of the ways he loves to torture me is on a bike, which I've never enjoyed. So I've started reading this really hilarious British, very funny blog about cycling called Sportive Cyclist, written by Monty. And it makes the torture that Nate puts me through bearable, because I just imagine that I'm like cycling through the British countryside with Monty and he's telling funny jokes and we're about to go get a cup of tea, and it helps power me through.
I was gonna say, if you're reading this while you're on that bike, then I would suspect that Nate still has some room to push you.
No, I am not. I am fighting for my life. I've literally gotten off the bike and collapsed on the floor and went into the bathroom and thrown up. And then he was like, "Okay, you done? Ready for the next thing?"
No mercy.
And I'm like, "Yes, Nate. Yes, I'm obviously ready."
All right, Nate. Well done. Question number 2, your favorite article of all time. Now, this can be one that you wrote or somebody else's.
If I can go with a book, I read a lot of books. And kind of tying into this conversation, I love the book Essentialism. I think that as we're going towards, this financial independence and growing our financial freedom, being more essential in all of the areas of our life, it makes it faster and it makes it better. And we know what the heck to do once we get there.
Yeah, that's a great book. And another one I recommend, which I'm sure you've read, Jillian, is The One Thing by Keller. And yeah, that's an absolutely wonderful book. So for everyone out there in the audience, those are 2 great books on a very similar topic. All right, question number 3, your favorite life hack.
So my favorite life hack, and it's something that I've been trying to grow into and diversify, but just the art of practicing generosity. I think we can really get tied up in this idea that generosity is just giving money, which I was actually good at that. I was good at just giving money. But over the last few years, I've really been trying to practice it on a daily basis. So one of the things that I love to do whenever I talk to people or I meet people, at the end of the conversation, I try to make sure I remember to ask, what's the most important thing that they're working on? And is there any way that I can help? Because I think there's something really powerful when you know the thing that's the most important to somebody. And oftentimes we can help in small ways, but if you can move the needle just a little bit on someone else's most important goal and dream, it's so meaningful for both people. So just practicing that art of generosity in my words and in my encouragement, being more intentional about sharing those things.
All right. Question number 4, your biggest financial mistake.
I was too scared to start investing, and I just waited too long. I was intimidated, and it seemed overwhelming, and it seemed risky, and I should have started in high school. I should have started when I was younger, but I put it off till literally like the latest possible point that it made sense. I think we probably had $20,000 or $30,000 in cash before I was like, okay, we have to figure this out. And of course, the first time we went out and tried, we totally messed it up. We ended up getting like an IRA in a savings bond, which is a disastrous thing, to do if you're like 22 years old. But there again, sometimes you don't have to, it doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to get started and you have to make some steps. So I do regret just being scared for too long.
Yeah, taking action is such a crucial aspect of just moving forward in anything. Otherwise, you could sit and be paralyzed from fear. So yeah, I mean, was that a big mistake at the time? Yeah, sure. But in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't seem to have hampered you too much. So certainly good on you there. All right, question number 5, the advice you would give your younger self.
Like I've mentioned, I didn't really dream probably big enough. Every little tiny dream I had, we've ended up like crushing times 10. And I wouldn't, knowing myself back then, I probably wouldn't even suggest to dream bigger because that would have been too big of a leap. But to have a backup plan, to have the B plan be the dream plan. Like, yeah, go with your A plan, make it reasonable, make it small, but at least create a backup plan that accounts for the fact that you might get a couple lucky breaks along the way, that accounts for the fact that things might happen that you don't see a way that they're going to happen yet. You don't see how it's going to be possible, but to at least plan as a B plan for things to be a little bit bigger.
I love that. And we do have a bonus question for you. We spend a lot of time, in fact, even on this show, talking about things that you didn't buy, things that basically, controlling your expenses and not constantly buying the next little thing that comes on your radar. But the reality is all of us do make purchases of value to us, and it's unique to us as individuals. And we're curious, what is the item that you purchased over the last year that held the most value for you personally?
Yeah, because we have been really working towards minimalism as far as our stuff. I'm definitely happier seeing stuff go out the door than in the door. Like, it still brings me a lot of joy when we go unload stuff at the Salvation Army. But over this last year, I've really loved hiring a personal trainer. That's been awesome. We bought a punch card to a local hot springs, and we try to make a point for just me and Adam to go there once or twice a month and hang out. And there again, it's a time for us to have these deeper, more meaningful conversations and to plan and to dream and to practice gratitude. We've done some weekends away without the kiddos, which has been amazing, at a resort. Like, all of those things have just been a delightful way to spend some money.
Awesome. Jillian, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a blast.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
Brad, this, in my mind, might be the most powerful episode that we have done to date for so many different reasons. But I think that this was all about the journey. I mean, no one has brought all these concepts together as cleanly, while the story may be chaotic and like the individual things that she had to deal with are so real, almost beyond belief for many of us. The way it comes together to show that it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. I don't think that anybody has been able to bring that together like she did.
Yeah, I agree completely. I'm very rarely at like a complete loss for words, but I think I am here. There's almost like too much to take in. I need to listen to this a couple times. I'm just blown away by, like she said, the grit and the resilience. And like I mentioned a couple times, almost like that audacity that she had to just build this life when who would adopt a kid at 21 years old? Most people at 21 are in college or are doing who knows what. That is just a remarkable thing in and of itself. And then to design this life, to not care what anybody else around them thinks, it really is an amazing story. And wow, I'm blown away and just really cannot thank Jillian enough for coming on.
To our audience, the one thing that you need to do this week to take action is get on her email list. You need to see these worksheets. I promise you, this is not something that's just cobbled together and put together with real no intention. These are value adds to your life. So I would love for the tens of thousands of people that are listening to this, for your one thing this week, go get on her list, get access to those worksheets. You will not regret it. And if you're enjoying the show, if you got value from today's episodes, if you've been getting value from the episodes up to this point, just take a second, press the subscribe button on the platform you're listening to this on. It just lets the providers know that you're getting value from the show and you want to be here when we produce additional episodes. If you want to support us in what we're doing here at ChooseFI, here are 4 easy ways. 1, leave us an iTunes review. If you want to do that, just go to ChooseFI.com/iTunes. 2, use our page to sign up for travel credit cards. If you want to travel the world with miles and points instead of your hard-earned dollars, then just go to ChooseFI.com/cards and get started today. 3, if you're working on the milestones of FI, set up a personal capital account to track your progress and use our affiliate link. It's completely free, and just go to ChooseFI.com/PC. P as in Paul, C as in cat. And 4, and most importantly, find your friends, coworkers, and family members who might be open to this message and tell them about the podcast. Have them start with episode 38, The Why of FI, and right behind that, have them go listen to episode 21, The Pillars of FI. It is a fantastic starting place. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to ChooseFI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.